Get cracking. Simulcast, YouTube. Okay, so we should be live on YouTube as well. Welcome, everyone to Alignment Vision Action. I am your host, Laurel Rutledge, and I'm so psyched to have my guest, Ash Merchant, tonight. This is going to be a great show. And I'm going to give you a quick bio of Ash, just real short because we want to spend most of the time talking. And please feel free, jump in anytime, comments, questions, all of that kind of stuff. Feel free to come on in. So Ash, who I met through a leadership group that I am on the board of, he's an executive advisor and coach, and he is fluent in a diverse range of topics. So an expert in human capital, risk management, relationship management, all of that kind of good stuff. And he's currently the founder and president of Lionheart Partners, which is a firm specializing in advisory services, leadership development, and executive coaching for clients in the US and around the world. And what I love about Ash and what's going to be so cool tonight is one of the key things he talks about is the importance of relationships in leadership and how we build those, how we maintain those, how we keep those authentic, how we make all of that happen both in clients and in our teams. So Ash, welcome to Alignment Vision Action on Fireside.
Hi, Laurel. So good to be with you tonight, and great to see your face
Yeah.
again. And wish we were in person, but this
I
is
know.
the next
Yes,
best.
this is so cool. And so I want to start here because so many times, especially me as an introvert, and we've talked about this before, so many times people forget that the whole idea around leadership, number one, leadership is about behavior, not position. But there's a lot that can be, let's say, overcome. A lot of weaknesses or gaps then can be overcome, or at least learned and moved through if we develop great relationships. So maybe let's start there. Talk a little bit about how you came to this whole idea of, relationships are a really key piece of exceptional leadership.
Yeah, it's a great way to frame it up, Laurel. And what I would say is, and I talk to clients about this, is our relationships are like currency. You think
Mm,
about foreign currencies, and you think about what's happening in the world today, in the US and
yeah,
Europe, Asia, China, Russia, wherever we are. Currencies fluctuate. They go up and
hmm,
down every day based on markets and conditions and how people are feeling and confidence
yeah,
and that sort of thing. Relational currency works exactly the same way.
yeah,
And when we think about that as leaders, this is about, are we making relational deposits daily
hmm,
and throughout the day with our teams? And I tell my clients, particularly those that are more and more senior, is
yeah,
the higher up you go, the greater percentage of your job is accomplished and actually successfully accomplished through the value of your relational currency and what that looks
yes,
like. Now, let me flip the script a little on that. Is early on in someone's career,
hmm,
and believe me, I have a 17-year-old and a 9-year-old at home, and I'm having this conversation with my 17-year-old about the value of relational currency, even at his
hmm,
age, where
hmm,
first job coming out of the gate, college, gap year,
yeah,
whatever the choice ends up being, the whole world revolves around strength of relational
yeah.
currency.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think what people sometimes miss, and again, everybody is not going to be a social butterfly. Everybody is not going to be a networking guru, right? But this is about relationships from the standpoint of they have to be, two-way, right? It's not just about you making sure people are following you, but for those people who really are kind of struggling with that importance of, as you say, relationship or relational currency, right? Relationship currency. Talk a little bit about how you move through from a leadership perspective and actually build that currency in a way that is aligned and in integrity, as opposed to just who are all the people that know me.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and I'll give you a live example. Just this past week, I had an opportunity to meet with a potential client, and we were talking about this idea of relational currency. And she's got a leadership retreat that's coming
Mm-hmm.
up in the next week, where she's having to actually address around
Mm,
400 or so people in the room.
yeah.
And there's a little bit of angst around that of, how am I going to connect with all 400? Well, the reality
Yeah.
is you're probably not.
No.
And relational currency is not about work in the room. It's not even about everybody effective immediately needs to be an extrovert, because that's not it
Mm-hmm.
either. Introverts, extroverts, people who are quiet or silent giants sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes the one on one authenticity of relationship building, that's where their superpower is. And they actually flourish better, faster, when they're
Yeah.
looking at it one relationship at a time versus, you live in Houston, I live in Atlanta. And
Mm-hmm.
if you and I were to go to our respective cities' Chamber of Commerce events, those events are never effective if somebody's just working the room and
Yes.
playing Vegas cards with their business
Right.
cards. It's one at a time, and it's
Yes.
two at a time, perhaps. And I think sometimes people, it's one of the misconceptions of what it takes to build authentic relationships. It always begins and starts with one relationship.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And so, it is for those of you who are joining for the first time, and I should have done this in the very beginning, just a quick little housekeeping. One, welcome to Fireside. It's a really cool platform. I think you're going to love it if this is your first time here. And there's a little react button in the bottom right. And when you click on that react button, you get all of these emojis and you can pick an emoji. And if you want to send a message or send a chat, then the little bar at the bottom of the emoji screen will give you a chance to add a message in. So feel free to do that. The emojis do have sound. I did not turn those off. If they get to be too much, then we'll turn the sound off. But feel free to please, jump in, comment, raise your hand. My amazing producer Jenny is there too, so she's going to be watching the chat and all that kind of stuff as well. So thank you so much for being here. And so Ash, one of the things you say that you just said that I also want to piggyback on because one of our mutual connections, Hong, says the same thing because I am not that whole chit chat thing just does not work for me. And yet, as you said, as I continued to move up in the organization and had to address hundreds and hundreds of people, right, thousands of people for our global uh, meetings, for me it was what Hong said to approach any of these situations where you are there. Is there one person that you're there to serve? Right? So you're not showing up for you. You're showing up for that one person who needs something from you. So even if you are extroverted, right? Even if this is your thing, even if you go to every chamber of commerce, every urban league, every whatever, because you get energy from that, flipping that switch to say, I'm really here to be in service to someone else, right? How do you play up on that idea? Because you and I have talked about that before, that whole servant leadership. How do you align this whole idea of relational currency with aligning with who you are and how you serve?
Yeah, it's an important question, and I would say that it's actually taken greater importance in the last 24 months as we've navigated through the COVID season. If you remember when we started in pandemic conditions, everyone was quick to say, "Well, I'm just going to work from home and do my work from home." And the reality
Right.
was we were doing life from home, and that life got interrupted in so many ways: school,
Yes.
uh, social interaction, elderly parents, kids, activities, just the different things.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to having to figure out the logistics of, well, wait a minute, I'm used to going to a physical bricks and mortar office every day, and now all of a sudden I am stuck at home.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of, how do you build that in? Sometimes when we get so over rotated, I know I've been guilty of this before, when you get so over rotated on your work and just the
Mm-hmm.
work tasks and the work product itself, we lose sight of the fact that people that are coming to work every day, they're not workers, they're people. They are
Yeah.
teammates, they are colleagues, they are moms, dads, um, grandparents, could be any of the above. And
Mm-hmm.
taking that authenticity of relationships, and really, and this isn't about I need to spend 2 hours a day learning about Laurel's deepest,
Right.
darkest secrets. This is
Right.
about, understanding that, hey, Laurel is just coming back from a vacation, and she went to Mexico, and this was a great opportunity for her that she's been planning for. Let me spend a minute or two on that.
Yeah.
If someone has a special needs child, if somebody was adversely affected during COVID, if somebody is getting married or having a child or any of those things, these are all real life events that happen. And what I tell leaders, and particularly around this area of servant leadership, is servant leadership doesn't mean we are just a bunch of softies out there that are just
Right.
going all in on the emotional side of things and then forgetting about what needs to happen from a day-to-day
Yeah.
standpoint in terms of running the business.
Mm-hmm.
Those two things can actually coexist, and in some cases they can coexist in a way that the business will flourish more,
Mm-hmm.
because people come to work, and we talk about the great resignation that's happening right
Yeah.
now, and there's been a lot of chatter this past year about this concept of sense of belonging. Do I actually
Mm-hmm.
belong in my organization? Do they make me feel like I belong here because they care about me, they've
Mm-hmm.
invested in me, they understand who I am and what my priorities are, and that alignment. If we lose that alignment, and
Yeah.
this is what it drives me nuts to hear companies that are saying, "Well, I just wish that we could just get things back to the way they used to be." Well, no, not on that. Don't do
Right.
that. That's an invitation for your people to leave when we
Yeah.
lose sight of the fact that people that come to work every day, they want to do a good job, but they also have
Mm-hmm.
other things happening in their orbit that we should at
Yeah.
least at minimum acknowledge. And
Right.
the best case is support where possible.
Right. Exactly. And what's very interesting that you say that is, I was talking this week about this whole idea about happiness, right? And I have so many clients that are like, we just want our people to be happy. We want everybody to be happy. And I'm like, no, 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 no. You don't want everybody to be happy because number one, you can't make everybody happy. It's just a
That's
goal that
right.
is impossible, right? But you do want people to feel valued. You want them to feel connected. You want them to feel like they fit and like there is this level of belonging, right? So now we've finally gotten this idea of, do I belong here? And so when we're talking about not only as leaders, because again, leadership is about behavior, not about position, because you can lead from being an individual contributor, right? The project you're on, the company you're in, the committee you're on, any of those kind of things enable you to have an opportunity to lead without having a leadership position. But it requires us to not only, as you said, be compassionate, right? And understand that people are whole beings, but it enables us or requires us to understand how we connect the whole being to ultimate outcomes that we're trying to achieve, right? So it's understanding how the personal impacts the overall objectives. And so as you're working with your clients, that idea of happiness versus belonging, and we just want everything to get back to normal, and we just want people to, be glad that they're here, and we don't want people resigning. What are you telling them about just, you got to get clear again. You got to get clear again on what you want, and then make sure your actions are aligning with that. How are you helping them reset?
Yeah, it's a great question, and let me add one more element to it.
Hmm.
Is when we talk about employee engagement, engagement has been all the rage in the last, say, 5 to 10 years, where
Yes.
companies have said we're gonna issue an engagement survey, or we're gonna hire XYZ company to run our engagement survey. And really, I had a colleague that I used to work with, and I love the way she described this. Was pure and simple. Engagement is when people are willing to go above and beyond what is normally expected of them. You have
Mm,
a highly engaged workforce when people behave in that manner. Now,
mm,
what drives that behavior? Well, it could be belonging, it could be appreciation, it could be creating an atmosphere where people come to work every day, and they're doing the work not just because that's what's expected of them, but they actually
right.
believe in the vision of the organization. They believe in their leadership. They believe that
Hmm.
I'm coming here every day not just to create shareholder value, and
Right.
That's not a creating shareholder value is not a bad thing. I mean, any
Right.
publicly traded company will tell you that creating shareholder value is important.
Right.
Any private equity backed company will say creating, enterprise value is important. I don't dispute either one of those. But when it becomes only about that and less
Mm-hmm.
about, okay, I'm actually making a difference in the life of my team or in the lives of
Yeah.
the people that are around me, because that's the platform that I've been placed on to
Mm-hmm.
use my God given talents and gifts. That's where, where I push clients is, okay, are you living out what your company purpose is, if it's a noble purpose? And are you
Mm-hmm.
living out what your personal purpose is? What have you?
Mm-hmm.
There's a former pastor here in Atlanta that loves to pose this question: is what is it that
Yeah.
you want to be known for? What do you want to be
Yes.
known for? And this
Mm-hmm.
gets to you and I talked a little bit about this a few weeks ago about legacy.
Yes.
Legacy is not a concept that we need to reserve only for people who are dead or almost dead. We need
Yes.
to look at legacy across the entire spectrum of generations right now and say, how am I leaving this opportunity better than how I found it? And I could be
Yeah.
24 years old and be thinking about what that legacy is, but I won't be motivated to leave good legacy if I'm not comfortable about the air that I'm breathing and the atmosphere that I'm in.
I love that. And that's a great segue to that whole idea of legacy, because you're right. We always think about legacy as, what's your epitaph going to read, right? And I always say, I really don't want my epitaph to say she worked real hard, right? That's
Nobody
great,
does.
but no, that's not valuable, right? But that whole idea of legacy and being a legacy, you can be, we often hear living legend, right? And even that sometimes is someone who is more advanced in advanced stages of their life. But that idea of legacy, you can be a legacy and be, in high school, you can be a legacy or leaving a legacy and be just showing up to volunteer wherever you are every day. It's like my dad used to always say, even when you have nothing, if you have a good name, you have everything. That's
Yes.
legacy. That's legacy. And so maybe speak a little bit more about that, not only in the context of organizations, but in the context of self-value. Because again, as we talk about aligning and having vision and then moving into action, that whole alignment piece is about really being clear on who you are and where you are. And so when you think about legacy for someone, how do you help them really understand you're creating legacy when you show up every day?
Yeah, you are. And I would tell you that there's a quote that was said years ago, and I love how the speaker framed it up. He talks about this idea of you do for one what you wish you could do for everyone.
Mm,
And it's similar
that's
to what
good.
you said, what your friend Hung said earlier. Um, you think about legacy in the terms of, okay, whose life am I going to be able to speak in today? Who am I going to be able to speak
Hmm.
life into today? What what area of the business, what area of the organization am I going to be able to say, you know what, I choose to be a difference maker today? Because
Hmm.
we get real caught up in next week, next month, when's my next pay increase? How am I showing up on the nine box? And where am I going to end up in the promotion
Yeah.
list and the cycles and all of that? And this is where it's almost like we have to slow down to speed up a little,
Hmm.
is we just got to pump the brakes a little bit and just say, okay, how do we do this
Yes.
on a much more intentional daily level rather than feeling like, yeah, you know what, I'll get to that.
Yeah.
I got to do I got to sell a bunch of stuff here, or I've got to
Yeah.
just nail this project over here, and then I'll go be, you know, I'll be your
Hmm.
missionary over there.
Right. Right. Yeah. What is that saying? You got to go
It's
slow to go fast, right? Sometimes.
you do, you really do, and I think what ends up happening is when all of this stuff that we're talking about comes down to execution, the biggest
Hmm.
sacrifice, Laurel, that people have to make is time. Because you think
Yes.
about relational currency, you think about legacy, it's usually coupled with you're pouring into somebody else. You're living for
Hmm.
something bigger than yourself. You are You are
Mm-hmm.
investing in things that are beyond yourself. Normally, that involves some element of you carving out your calendar
Yeah.
and putting time on there to be with another person, to spend time with another
Yeah.
person. And this applies to personal life
Mm-hmm.
too.
Mm-hmm.
For those of us that have, I'm blessed to have my parents
Mm-hmm.
still alive and my in-laws are still alive, and I know that as they get older, and if we're not carving out intentional time to be
Right.
with them and spend with them, whether it's something as simple as eating lunch in the middle of the week kind of thing,
Right.
that's my only sacrifice on those types of things is truly
Yeah.
my time. Nothing bad or chaotic happened in my business. Now I'm a
Yeah.
solopreneur, so I get to do stuff like
Yeah.
that. But even in general terms, even if you're working for somebody
Mm-hmm.
else, people always have choice
Yes.
on how they set up their calendar, and that alignment around calendar and your talent and your treasure and all of those things come
Yes.
together. They become a reflection of what your legacy will ultimately become.
I love that because and so many things you said there. One, the whole idea of choice, because we all have a choice, right? So even if you're working for someone else, you have a choice. You choice a choice in how you show up, when you show up, if you show up, you have a choice every day. And I, like you, the whole beauty of being able to do my own thing now is that I can spend some time with my mom, spend some time with family. There have been some things I've been able to just respond to immediately because I wasn't having to deal with somebody else wondering where I was going to be or having to ask for PTO or any of that kind of stuff. Now, that's not to say that it was horrible, right? That's not the case. Corporate was in many ways very, very good to me, and I would not be able to do the things I'm doing now without that. And and so there was a time, right? A season for everything, and there was a season for that. And yet there is, for me, a much greater purpose that I feel led to deliver before I leave this earth, because time is not renewable, and we never know how much of it we actually have. So we want to use it to the to fullest every day. And so, and for those of you in the audience, definitely anytime, raise your hand, jump in, make a comment. Would love to hear your questions on what you think and your comments on what you think about legacy and how you are creating a legacy in everything that you're doing on a regular basis. So feel free to jump in, and Jenny's watching too. So if we can, we'll invite you up to speak and be watching your comments. So, Ash, I want to dive a little bit deeper, just from an individual perspective, regardless of whether you're, working, not working, corporate, not corporate, nonprofit, whatever that kind of stuff is, and dig a little bit more into this choice connected to relational currency, right? And how we choose to whom we give our relational currency. How do you make
Yeah,
that decision around who you let in your village, for me, right? How do you do
yeah,
that?
it's a great question. So, one thing I will say, and this sort of ties also into the idea of purpose.
Mhm.
Just oftentimes when we talk about our purpose in life or in work or anything like that, we almost look at it as a singular event, or we look at it as a pot at the end of the rainbow type of
Mhm.
concept. And the reality on purpose is it involves relationships, but the biggest asterisk I would put on that is invest in positive
Mhm.
relationships only.
Mhm.
I was in a client meeting just 2 days ago this week, and one of the gentlemen that was in the room just said, I just I am exhausted with the people that come up to me and they're just always sucking the life out of me, because they're complaining about something, or we didn't
Yes.
handle a situation well enough, and everybody's got an opinion and all of that. And what was interesting was where we got to in that conversation was he's actually crowding out by actually entertaining those negative naysayers, and some of them frankly were toxic relationships.
Mhm.
You end up crowding out the people you don't want to crowd out. So
Yes.
it's and maybe this comes with wisdom and maturity, that just as you grow up, basically you start aging out of friend circles, and you start self-selecting who your friends and who your acquaintances are going to be, largely on the basis of, okay, are these people life giving or are they life sucking?
Oh,
And maybe it's
yes.
the older I get, but I just don't have a lot of time for the drainers,
Oh,
and I do my level best to stay away
oh my God, that's so
if I
good.
can. Now,
That's so
that's not
good.
always possible in a work setting, but
Right.
I'll say, I mean, in a work setting, what I would say is, are you investing in positive relationships, and
Yeah.
do you serve somebody in a positive capacity?
Mm-hmm.
Because you ultimately end up becoming a product of the people you're surrounding yourself with,
Yes.
whether it's in work, whether it's at home, whether it's at church or sports or wherever you are.
Mm-hmm.
You'll end up very similar to the 5 to 8 people that you spend the most time with.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so good because I had someone that worked for me in a few years ago, and every time we had a meeting, almost the entire meeting was just one problem after another and one kind of drama and and I just so finally I got to the place where I said, you know what? So here's the thing. We have certain goals we want to accomplish. And I also recognize that for you, it's important for you to get all of this out so you can function. So I'm going to begin to ask you, is this event session or are we moving towards something? That'll be the first question. And then if it is event session, then I'm going to give you 5 minutes to vent and then we're going to move forward. And I said, that's for you and for me, because at some point we have to keep moving, because if we let ourselves get in that quagmire of just crap, we'll never get anything done. It brings everybody down and we've got other things to do. Right. So,
I love
and
it. Yeah,
what I,
I love it.
what I found was it made it better for this person. It made it better for me. It was clear about what we were trying to do. And I didn't leave every one of those meetings going, oh God, now I need a nap. Right. I just can't. I don't have any more energy. So you find those ways for those energy suckers, right? If you can't avoid them, how do you manage them?
Yeah, yeah, and I would tell you that it is. It's interesting when you have enough people that are in your universe and your atmosphere that are actually positive and life giving and all that. Even
Yes.
as adults in the marketplace, there's an element of peer pressure there, where
Yes.
you either crowd that voice out if it truly is toxic. Now, if it's a situation where they just seek to be understood and they have a hard
Hmm.
time getting that message across, and there's probably some coaching that needs to happen on how you do that, that's a different story.
Yeah.
But
Right.
you can't quit and stay.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, for people, and it drives me bananas to hear companies that say, you know what, that's just who they are. Laurel's just
Yeah.
that way. Well, no, that
No.
Laurel's becoming a toxic influence on us, and
Yes.
it is and as leaders, it's incumbent upon us to call that out. As leaders in organizations, in terms
Yeah.
of inter leadership conversations at the senior
Mm-hmm.
level, I love what Jim Collins talked about 22 years ago when he
Mm-hmm.
wrote that book, Good to Great. He talks about this idea of high performing leadership teams and level 5 leadership teams that talk about the idea of conducting autopsies without blame.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
love that, the way he frames that, because he basically says, look, we are going to have some difficult conversations about what the cause of death of that project was, or why that thing
Yes.
screwed up, or why the payroll hiccup happened, or whatever. But let's do it with the intent of focusing on the perhaps the clinical side of it, of, okay,
Yes.
why did this problem happen, versus,
Yes.
you know what, Susie is an incompetent rube over
Right.
there, and James is just a complete jacknut and doesn't need to be here. Well, that doesn't do anything for
Right.
anybody.
Right.
So autopsies without blame, and really getting senior teams and even business owners
Mm-hmm.
to think about this. This is hard in
Yeah.
founder-led firms that
It
have
is.
hired all of the people that are around them
Yes.
because they're so emotionally invested in it, and it's hard not to personalize it. And yet the sign of maturity is, okay,
Yeah.
can we do this in a constructive and a productive way and still
Absolutely.
protect our relationships?
Yes, I always say let's just do a postmortem, right? Let's just do a postmortem on this. And what's interesting for me is, as he did say, this autopsy without blame. I think one of the things that we also have a hard time doing is having these conversations focused on an issue and outcomes and behaviors as opposed to an individual,
Yes.
right? And so ultimately, you may come down to the conclusion that there was an individual that was at the crux of something. But the reality is, when you're having these conversations, even when it's a difficult performance conversation, one way to diffuse kind of that challenge is talking about, here is the behavior that was observed. Here was the outcome or the impact of that behavior versus the outcomes or the impact that we wanted. So therefore, we've got to address the behavior. So trying not to use that word you, as much as possible, avoiding the you, because the minute you say you, then it becomes, an attack on a character. And so how, I don't know how we help leaders begin to practice that more of focusing on the thing, the issue, and not the person. Just like in org development, what are we trying to do first? Then you talk about people last. The last thing you do is talk about names. Because if you start with names, you
Yeah.
get into all of that other stuff, right? Which is not where we want to be.
Well, then it becomes personalized and not really addressing
Yes,
the problem in a direct way that it needs to be addressed.
exactly. Yeah, I don't know. It is
And
for me. Go ahead, Ash.
no, I was going to say my short answer or reaction to that is this one has to start with as highest level in the organization, whether it's a small company or a big company or anybody. It's got to be driven at the highest possible level. Otherwise, it feels like lower level managers are pushing a rope uphill if they're not
Mm-hmm.
supported,
Mm-hmm.
and frontline workers are feeling like they're pushing a rope
Yes.
uphill because they're not
Yes.
supported at the senior levels.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. Well, and I invited a couple of you to speak if you'd like to come up to the stage and make a comment or ask a question. Would love that if you feel so inclined. Yeah, when when I think about the power of leadership and the power of this idea of relational currency, it really for me speaks so much to that really owning who we are, and also being so aware of not only our amazing gifts, because we all have them, but being confident enough to be aware of the gaps that we have and how those gaps may be impacting our relational currency, right? And so it is not it's not a weakness to admit a weakness. Right? So how does that,
yes,
in your experience, Ash, how does that ability to be confident in the stuff that's not great, how does that kind of support relational currency?
yeah, it's funny. One of the latest sets of studies that have been done out there, and a variety of firms have done it, but they've all sort of landed on this idea of how much humility matters.
Mm-hmm.
So the folks at McKinsey just put out a book, a really content-rich book that talks about the mindset of CEOs, six different
Mm-hmm.
mindsets of CEOs, and what they talk about in there is it's not the loudest voices of he or she that's pounding his or her fist on the table. It is that sort of quiet humility, and that humility manifests in an acknowledgement, whether it's a direct acknowledgement or whether it's even an indirect acknowledgement that, you know what,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have all the answers here. And guess
Yeah.
what? I'm not the smartest cat in the room. They might be the smartest cat in the room, but they never make the other person or their leaders feel like, that's going to be lorded over them. So I
Right.
would say that for this and what you're asking here, there has to be a level of personal humility, and
Yeah.
this one's hard
It
because you
is.
actually are having to open up a level of vulnerability that most people are not willing to do. Or let's say
Right.
that your family of origin viewed something something that you weren't good at as a sign of weakness, or perhaps worse,
Mm-hmm.
even incompetence, and that's just how you
Yeah.
grew up, or that's how your culture was. I mean, this cuts across cultural lines too,
Yes.
There are
Yeah.
specific cultures that are very performance driven and performance oriented, and the thought of not having an answer, and this starts way back in
Yes.
school age,
Mhm.
that if you don't have all the answers right, and if you didn't nail your spelling test, or if you didn't,
Right.
memorize your times tables, or whatever the metric was, you are viewed as something lesser than perhaps what you are. And if when people get ingrained like that over time, whether it's as a kid or even in a professional setting, it it puts so much pressure on this idea of showing
Mhm.
vulnerability and humility, because there's a fear of, well, I'm going to look stupid, or I'm going to get
Yeah.
passed over for a promotion because I'm going to look weak.
Yes.
and and that's such a misnomer, and worse, it's a toxic belief,
I
really.
agree. I agree. And for those of you who are in the audience as well, if you click on that little circle at the bottom left, there is an option that says request to speak. So you could do that. And Randy, you're on the stage. You can unmute yourself. Welcome to the show.
Hi, well, thank you, Laurel. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
Good. Hi, Ash. It's really great to see your face and to hear your voice. It's been a little while, but I love just being able to hear from you.
Yeah, Randy, good to hear from you too.
So real quick, I love the conversation, and I don't have anything to add except I wanted to put something into the conversation that you
Hmm.
guys can talk about. But I'm curious: is this, in your estimation, you think back to the days when we were dealing with command and control cultures, and then moving from command and control cultures to much more. Bottom up or egalitarianism or things like that, where the organization said, we want to hear from you, right? Influence of DE and I and things like that.
Hmm.
Do you believe that with the influx of a younger generation, let me pose it differently. How much influence do you think the influx of a younger generation has had on some of these changes that you're talking about, Ash? Or is it just the evolution of the organization?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's got such tentacles to it too. And what I would say, and Laurel, do you mind if
Yo, please.
I'll
Yes.
speak into this one? We have really five generations in the workforce right now,
Hmm.
and Randy, to your point, I think it was a natural evolution that we were ultimately going to get to this point because of that. And if for those of you that haven't seen this work, Dr. Tim Elmore has done some dynamite research in the area of generations, and just talking about what matters to each generation in terms of leadership style, in terms of having their voice heard. I am a parent of two Gen Zs,
Hmm.
and the amount of real time feedback that they give, or at least feel like they are entitled to give, is ginormous. And that sort of cascades into other generations as well. So people are always wanting to give feedback in real time and give their opinion. I mean, we live in a world of Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and
Yes.
all these other just such quick feedback loop mechanisms that are out
Hmm.
there, that people can just sort of quickly say what's on their mind. It's happening in the workforce for sure. Now,
Yeah.
I do think, Randy, to your other point, is companies as they mature, I think they're going to have to, if you look at some of the old, and I'll use UPS as an example. It's one of our hometown heroes here in Atlanta. UPS is over 100 and I don't know, 110-year-old company right now, and just their new CEO, who was hired during the pandemic, talks about this idea of one of the first policies that she had to really take a scalpel to was the tattoo policy and the ear piercings policy. Now, think about your local UPS driver or the worker that's 20 something years old. It's pretty likely they've got a tat or they've got an earring.
Hmm.
And that was a very strict dress code policy
Yeah.
around that. And the reality was, just the lift that they probably got in their teams just by acknowledging something that was fairly benign.
Hmm.
And please don't hear this, and please don't share this video with my kids. I am not advocating for people going out and getting tattoos and earrings, but at the same time, it's a market reality that
Yeah.
we have with people socially and demographically, and it was an easy fix for them to make. So I think, Randy, to your earlier comment about are companies actually going to evolve in this?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think for some things they are.
Yeah.
Certainly, DE&I is putting a lot of light on that topic as well
Right.
right now.
It's evolve or die, right? You gotta keep moving. We gotta keep evolving. Um, and to piggyback on that, Ash, with these five generations, there is, and we just, my girlfriend that's in the audience tonight, Jan, we just had the pleasure of talking to some high school seniors last week, as a matter of fact. Ooh, time is flying. Last week, and we talked about things like decorum. We talked about things like wardrobe. We talked about things that, there is still such a thing as appropriate, right? And so when you think about this evolutionary um, change, this ability to flex about what is allowable or appropriate or things like that, as time moves, there still is a level of appropriateness and decorum and calm and just being respectful and things like that. How do you, when you think about leaders, especially looking at cross-generational leaders and leadership teams that all five generations are represented in the teams, how are you working through with your teams to address that fine line between, you know what? It's a tattoo. Does that have
Yeah,
anything to do with the accounting work that we have them to do? It really does
yeah.
not, right?
Well,
How are you doing that?
yeah, I'll give you an example. So we talk about this idea in the realm and through the lens of executive presence.
Hmm.
Now, when we think about, I was having this conversation with okay, now this generation's going to hate the way I'm about to describe this, but anyone that's over the age of 37
Yeah.
is considered, and under the age of 41
Hmm.
is actually considered a geriatric millennial. Now,
Hmm.
I think that's the funniest
I
moniker
do
you could
too.
put out there for them. But so I'm talking to somebody that's in their late 30s,
Yeah.
and we're talking about this idea of thinking out loud.
Hmm.
Now, this generation grew up literally thinking out loud, whether
Hmm.
they spoke it or whether they tapped it out on their phone.
Hmm.
There was always this idea of, well, I'm just going to say what's on my mind.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about this idea of how do you moderate that when you are an exec, in a leadership role, whether it's a
Yes.
frontline leader or whether you're in a senior leadership role, because oftentimes when you think out loud with your teams and you'll just say stuff and you are in your mind, you're thinking, well, I'm just sort of musing about it and
Yes.
I'm just noodling the idea. All of a sudden, boom, somebody on your team hears that and they start running towards whatever it
Yes.
is that you were thinking out loud about. And so just understanding how to moderate that and how to and it's not an issue necessarily about decorum, but it is
Hmm.
about executive presence, and it's about,
Yes.
okay, I know I'm going to say less, I'm going to ask more questions, and really sort of dig a little bit more and critically think a little bit more before I actually offer up
Yeah.
an opinion.
Yeah. It's that whole idea of knowing that you're someone who processes out loud or not, and being really, really transparent about what's going on. I know me, and I will walk into meetings, and we're talking about stuff. But I learned, because I don't need micromanaging at all. Like,
Right.
I need us to decide what we're going to do, and then I'm off, right? I don't need to meet with you. I don't need any of that. In fact, I prefer not to. But I had to learn, as I continued to start to lead people, that there are many people who would come to work for me who needed that constant connection, right? Is this where you're going? Are we clear? What's going on? And I also know I move really fast. I think fast. I talk fast. And so I finally got to the point where I would tell my teams, I'm like, look, there's so much on my plate right now, but that doesn't mean you're not important. What it means is my calendar is no longer mine. It is not mine. I am a victim of my calendar. And so don't let me do a drive by. If I run by your office and say, hey, can you do this? And I keep going, and you're like, wait, what? Stop me. I'm not going to be offended. I'm not going to be hurt. I'm going to try to be as mindful as possible in that. But I'm generally not even having time to go pee. So if I do that to you, stop me. But that requires a level of self-awareness and a willingness not only to own that, but a willingness to recognize that impact on other people and change what you can. Now, I'm not changing my poker face. That's just not happening. But I can
No, of
manage
course.
the words I say, right? I can manage what's on my face, right? So that I don't say what my face says.
No, that's right. That's right. And some of that comes with maturity as a professional. You know, the other piece is, and this is going to be interesting to watch, that we've seen companies that are going back to work in their
Mm-hmm.
office, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's on a modified schedule or anything like that. What we lost over the last 2 years was the informality to be able to stick your head into somebody's cube or stick
Yes.
your head into their office and actually solve something in 3 minutes
Mm-hmm.
versus I got to get into their calendar and I got to schedule a Teams call and I got to
Yeah.
just it became so sterile and overly prescriptive where
Mm-hmm.
it just that kind of informal
Yeah.
banter and or brainstorming just took a hit over the
Yes.
last couple of years. So we got to build back that. The other piece is this last 2 years got us a little bit conditioned in back-to-back calls. I mean,
Yes.
I struggle with it even today of just saying, all right, I've got to build some air in my
Yes.
calendar, otherwise I am going to suffocate with just the weight of back to back to back to back.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is the COVID period actually extended the bookends of the day. You start
Yes.
earlier, you end later,
Yes.
and oftentimes it's sort of bleeding into both edges of your day.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we joke about it, I don't even have time to go to the bathroom or take
Right.
a food break or eat anything because my calendar is just so jam packed because I
Yeah.
feel like that's what I've got to do. And this is a discipline that's hard
Yeah.
of saying no or not
Yeah.
yet.
Exactly. And and it is interesting because that back to back, we we took up the time. If we had any time, we would have the time at least to walk from one meeting to another, right? To go from one building to another, to get back to our offices, to go to something else. And because we didn't have to commute anymore, right? We just sucked up all that time with, oh, I don't need that 15 minutes to go to the next thing. I can use that to just go ahead and get on the next thing, thinking, oh, well, if I just do it now, then I'll end earlier, as opposed to how it just filled all the gaps. So there's no white space anymore. There's no white
Exactly.
space. So, well, we're at about 45 minutes. So anyone else, Elizabeth, I saw you join. Thank you for joining the show. I want to thank you because I know you're an hour ahead, so this is really much the end of your day there, and I want to thank you so much for spending your time and sharing your wisdom with us here on Alignment Vision Action on Fireside, because I
I
really
love
don't take
being
that
with
for
you.
granted. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you so much for having me. And it's
Absolutely.
always a pleasure to be with you and happy to answer questions and happy to
Yeah.
even take questions offline. Feel free, I mean, for anyone that's out there that feel
Yes.
free to connect in with me on LinkedIn and mention that you were on the show and happy to
Yes.
continue the dialogue.
Yes, please do. And you can find him at Ash Merchant on LinkedIn. So be sure, and his company is Lionheart Partners. So be sure to look him up at Lionheart Partners as well. So, and people that I have on, if someone says, hey, connect with me on LinkedIn, please do that. Remember, it's about relational currency. Who who is in your network that you can build now, not when you need something, right? Build now because there's a way for you guys to share, to lift each other up, to be able to build this foundation so that you can continue to be aligned with who you are and where you are. And as you get clear on where you want to be, you can get clear on who you need and what gaps you need to fill. And there may be somebody in your network who can help you do that. So you're not suffering and taking much longer than necessary to do it. So thank you, Ash, for being there. Anyone in the audience, I would love to have you guys. If there's another question or a comment, feel free to hit your button really quickly. And if not, I will tell you guys, thank you again for being here. Definitely, you'll see in the little fortune cookie. Would love to have you just go get a quick drop of the podcast. It is the Rutledge Perspective podcast. You can also find it on my website, laurelrutledge.com. You can just click the podcast area and you can see all the episodes are there. Short, sweet, 15 minutes, commute time, former commute time, 15 minutes, just really quick little juicy bits to feed you and to get you going for your next thing. So if there are I don't see any other questions or comments. I see lots of hand clapping. I see lots of thank yous, lots of fire. So thank you all so much for being part of the audience. Thank you, Ash, for being here. You guys follow Ash on social media. And if you enjoyed this and you got something out of it, I encourage you to share the replay. I'll be putting up the replay